Good morning. It's about 12 o'clock in New York time, and I guess 9 o'clock in LA, and about 5 o'clock in England or Great Britain if you're over there. You know why we're here. We're trying to get the gals and guys together. If you're a gal, we would like for you to call in and tell us your budget. How much do you spend on daycare and that sort of thing? And then we want to pick you up and go back in time and put you into the world of the 1950s in the United States, where you were a professional home economist. And they ran the house like a business, uh, and they had a budget. How much of a budget would you need for furniture and dishes and groceries and clothing and piano lessons for the children and tennis lessons for yourself? Because if you're going to do the producing, you do the consuming. And if you could find people to do that seriously, from the gal's point of view, and then you turn to the guy and say, okay, how many hours do you have to work if you have a job? A plumber is a job. A professional athlete isn't. Most of these university professors do not have jobs, uh, but somebody that produces things has a job. And so if you knew how many hours you work and you knew how much of a budget you would need, with those two things, you can start to do wondrous things. Let me remind everybody what home economics is. There's poverty. So you ask, well, how do you get people out of poverty? What is not poverty? And that's the household unit. That's the smallest economic thing. Uh, Pretend you're watching this computer and you pretend to take out a transistor and you take out a second transistor. And as you take out the third transistor, it's no longer a computer, it's a pile of electronic parts. You put that transistor back in, it's back to being computer, and that's the smallest economic thing. 10-year-olds can't pay for their mommies. Mommies can't take care of their children and go work in the shop. And hubbies can't go work in the furniture factory and take care of the children and run a household. And so the husband and wife are viewed as a single unit. When you get married, you become one person. And you know the drill. There's a household unit, that's a detached house. Is a detached house from the 1950s is a good example. You have a living room to live in and a dining room to eat, and you might have a kitchen to service the dining room and a bedroom, a utility room to service the house. You might have a big American car that you used. It was similar to, say, a farm truck, and it's the smallest thing. You're back in business, and that's what made uh, life easy. Life was easy then. And so you know the drill. There's a household unit, a home economics. Then you go off to the side, and at the bottom, you start with farming and mining. Then above that, manufacturing. Then above that, wholesale, retail, and repair. And above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers form a kind of ladder that holds it all together. And it's the priest that causes it to come into being to begin with. It's a religious thing. It comes out of popes and monks and monasteries. It's God and country. That's as opposed to communism, which is a prima donna intellectual government, and fascism. Communism is when a group of intelligentsia, the intelligent class, live in the big house, and everybody else lives in communist housing projects, and everybody else has a job of servicing the people, the class of intelligentsia, the people who live in the big house. It's quite a bum's rush. It's quite a hustle. Um, Communism is wondrous until you start to get into it. And then you realize it's just like an episode of The Twilight Zone. You do nothing but live in the slave quarters, and you do everything. All you do is service the intelligentsia. Let's go back to home economics. It's much more fun. That young couple has to practice virtues. They're normal and well-adjusted. They become a normal, well-adjusted person, which isn't a natural thing. And then you might become a good husband if you choose to raise a family, a good father. And it spills into home economics. And it's home economics gets everybody out of poverty and into plenty. And so we're hoping with everything going on with our society getting ready to collapse and that sort of thing, if you're hearing this and you would chime in and say enough is enough, and start saying this is how much money I need. I can't do this anymore, says one gal after the other on the computer, on social media. I pay this much for rent, and I pay this much for groceries, and I have here in Tucson almost $1,000 for daycare to watch somebody else raise your child. That's one person, by the way, and rent. It goes on, and it just doesn't stop, and it's not going to. It's going to get worse and worse. Has a name. It's called the Lazy V, and it all happened around in the 1970s. In the 1950s, the Communist Party came out and said they'll overthrow the United States using economics around about 1973. And that was a watershed year for the United States. That was the year of the highest standard of living as far as the average Joe goes. After that, it turns into the letter V on its side. In the most stereotypical fashion, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. Just so it's said, it happened something like there's a change, something like this. There's a change in attitude, and they became the Darwin alpha male. They didn't think twice about causing poverty. So there's the guy, and he marries a feminist, and the feminist gets a job, but the bum's rush there is it really wasn't a job as part of the consumption society. So at the time, the husband still made enough money to pay the grocery bills and the utility bills. And so the gal, the feminist income was extra. And with that extra, instead of buying a house, they'd buy a duplex. And the fact that they bought a duplex causes the prices of houses to go up. And they get somebody to rent that duplex and pay for their mortgage. And who do they get to rent? They get the people who are at the very bottom of that huge middle class. And they shove people at the bottom into the class of peasantry. And now those guys have to start renting and paying somebody else. And what does the feminist do and the guy do? They move up in the foothills, start collecting rent, and it gets worse and worse. It's just like this. The prices of houses around here went up so much as much as $2,000 a month. And that meant other people who kept having to work more and more hours. If you add all the other things that went along with that, the idea that if you had a job that that produced something like a plumber, you had to start working more and more hours, and then your wife had to start working, and it just gets worse and worse. And virtues, they threw out virtues and were malicious. The more malicious you were, the more money you made. There was a welded connection between money and malice, and with the exceptions of the rule, that's just the way it is. And so it goes on and on. So I'm hoping somebody will hear this, and I'm hoping somebody will start chiming in. This is how much money I make. I can't do this anymore. I have a child, and I just can't. I can't make ends meet. And you're not going to. It's going to get worse and worse. There was a welded connection between money and malice. The more the gal went to ask the 10-year-old what he wanted for his birthday, the more she was plunged into poverty. The more the guy turned around and tried to come up with the grocery bill and a bicycle for the little guy at Christmas, the more he was plunged into poverty. The more you went the other way, the more vicious you were, the more money you made. For example, this neighborhood that you're looking at was built in around 1950. It's a terrific example. That the guy who built the neighborhood made money by making other people better off. It's called a subsidiary. He built the neighborhood, but one guy built this house. The house next door was built by somebody else. The house 2 doors down was built by somebody else. Our dad was a repairman, and he lived in this house. This is a house I grew up in. Next door was a plumber. 2 doors down was the milkman, if you remember who they were. And there was this huge middle class. You made money by making somebody else better off. You had the leadership style of washing the feet of the apostles, and it turns into a normal supply and demand curve. Everything changed. Somebody bought a house, so they started buying a house for their child to go to college in. And the very fact that the University of Arizona is down the street, the very fact that they did that causes the price of houses to skyrocket. And when their child graduated, they could sell the house and make money. The very act of cashing in on it all. And then there was a plus one. A next group comes in, and they, instead of selling the house, they keep it and rent it out to college kids. And another guy comes who's plus one to that, and he puts say some apartments in the backyard. And now, instead of being a place to raise the next generation of children, there's apartments in the backyard. They shove as many people as they can. And it gets worse. They build these huge apartments. They call them houses. They just happen to have 7 bedrooms and that sort of thing. And you get the idea. They're building a slum straight out of the school book. Everybody knows how a slum is built by now, and they're doing it, and absolutely no one can stop them. You couldn't go to court and say, look, Your Honor, these guys are causing people to have to work more hours, and tough. That's just life. If we were back to the world of God and country, then we could. Then they could. That's a religious argument. You would have to have a religious argument. You would have to lay down the law and say, well, you have a chance to go in the foothills and collect rent from everybody, but in this world, we call that the bad guy. And but if you're going to be the guy that builds the neighborhood, the big business guy, well, you can go live in the luxury house down the street, but you'll never be living in the foothills collecting rent. These guys up here are the communist intelligentsia, or the cruel, queer, atheistic, communist, and fascists. Doesn't make, to bum a phrase from the 1950s, they're the cruel, queer, atheistic, communist, and fascists, or they're a bunch of queer scoundrels. They cause poverty. Call them communist housing projects or tenements, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. Same thing. Shove as many people as they can and keep going plus one, and it builds a slum. That's as opposed to these guys right around here. This is the United States, or what should be this large middle class. When these guys appear, there's this huge middle class, and this poverty disappears. But when these guys appear, these guys up here can't appear. And these two people are at odds with each other. They're at war with each other. If there is no God, if Christ didn't rise on the third day, then that's what you do. All the reasoning, all the court decisions are pull you in the direction of being a psychopathic nut, being in the foothills, doing all the consuming, and everybody else does all the producing. If Christ rose on the third day, and then you hold that as faith, and then you have you lay down the law, you have a citizenry of normal, well-adjusted people, even though that's not a natural thing, race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents, and it extends out into a normal supply and demand curve. And that's how you get everybody out of poverty. Kids were cheap in the sense that it didn't take much money to put shoes on their feet. And that's a deliberately arranged thing. The public administrator arranges the parameters of competition so that there be a huge middle class. If you breed a breed of normal, well-adjusted people, then there'll be a breed of normal, well-adjusted people. If you arrange the parameters of competition so that there's a huge, large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. In a way, it's as simple as that. All it takes is some guy to die and come back from the dead, I guess. So you can just see them on YouTube, and their past tears, their past emotions, they have a counterpart. They're the gals that are going to Radcliffe and Vassar and Wesley. and they're the ones who are collecting rent, or their parents or now grandparents got into gold and real estate, and they can live very high up the hog at the expense of the lives of other people. And they'll do that until society collapses, and then we'll end up pitching a tent by an abandoned 100,000 seat football stadium. It's something I heard decades ago. It looks like they're doing it. By the way, it's called the Consumption Society. And I remember in the 70s, Dan Rather was a news guy. He was he was considered a very left wing, somebody you had to stand up against. And every now and then he would pause, look up at the camera, and say something as if he was passing the word. And one day in the 1970s, he paused, looked up, put a smirk on his face, and said, "We're in the Consumption Society," and then went back to giving the news. I remember it to this day simply because I wondered, well, what in the world is a consumption society? I should know this stuff. I have the stereotypical do-gooder degree. I'm supposed to do stuff like this. They would never tell you. They would just pull it on you. And so that represents the idea that there was a group that did it very intentionally, and they did it. And the truth of the matter is they just won. So the only way you're going to fight that is if you start to stand up to it. Nobody can do it for you. We have to do this on our own. By the way, just to make sure, it said in the 1970s, when there was a revolution, there was a welded connection between money and malice. It really didn't make any difference at the time. The idea of Republican and Democrat really came in second best. It was people who hustle. It was an attitude. You're the women's liberation movement. They crawled out. All you have to lose is a kitchen sink. And if you have a sense of category, you'll realize that they didn't discriminate for or against women. They discriminated in favor of women who were malicious and against people who practice virtues. And you can fill in the blank, the black civil rights guys, the Chicano group, the hippy dippy types, rock and roll music, that all have that. And somehow if you pull the lens back enough so you can see it, you'll realize they all had that in common. So theirs was a welded connection between money and malice. But today is different. You could be in the upper class and be a really decent person or a really scandalous person, or you can be in the lower class and be a really decent person or a really scandalous person. And you have to shift the sense of categories. The good guys in this group are the guys who practice virtues. And the idea is that the priest who takes a vow of poverty maximizes profits. The gal who changes the dirty diapers gets the sex, and it spills into home economics. It's actually two very famous arguments from a guy named St. Thomas Aquinas. I think it's the fourth or fifth way of Aquinas. They're the two arguments that are more affectionately known as the truth of the truth and the decent of the decent. Let's give them our names. The gal who changes the dirty diapers gets the sex. The priest who takes a vow of poverty maximizes profits. They go together like the line in the lowercase letter I, and it's that dot, Christ rising on the third day. The real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the priest, that disposition that's in the priest that causes it all to come into being to begin with. And there's something to that. That was the only thing that was thrown out. And look at all the people starving in the streets because of it. That's easy. You can't be a Yank without being Catholic. Be Catholic, and now you're a Yank, and we're back in business. In the 1970s, they said, you'd say, okay, be a Yank. And they would say, great, but you can't have religion in government. You say, okay, you have no religion in government, be a Yank anyway. But they threw out that being a Yank, that ideal society we're making. And so you say, why? And they'll say, well, you can't shove your religion down my throat. And you counter that by pointing out that that is a religious position. That's the very stereotypical definition of a satanic church. And then they just grin and say, we got you. And there's that Twilight Zone moment when these guys are in their 70s and 80s, and they just and everybody else is starving, and they just grin and say, "That's it." And that is, if there's no heaven, if there's no hell, they're not going to have any price to pay for it, and you'll starve. If there's a heaven and a hell, well, and it looks like there's a lot more evidence for that than anyone wants to admit, then they're going to have to pay a price for it. But there's still poverty, and there's still you and I. And hopefully we have to straighten up and at least try and do something right. And so I'm going to go off the air now. I'm going to try. I'll be back. Let's see, Saturday and Sunday. Saturday at 4 o'clock here in Tucson. That's 3 o'clock in LA and 6 o'clock in New York time. And that's also 9 o'clock Sunday morning in Australia. And then Sunday mornings at 12 o'clock in New York, and 9 o'clock in LA, and 5 o'clock in England or Great Britain. And so I'm hoping you'll speak up or pass a word. And there's also a YouTube channel and also a Facebook group and channel, an Instagram channel, and hopefully a Truth Social channel. And I hope you'll join it. If you join it, then once you start to put numbers to this, once you say, look, you're the gal, you're the one that's doing all the work here, instead of you say, look, this is how much I need on the credit card, just shut up and give it to me and let's go to work. The gals, the oppressed common housewife did the overwhelming majority of consuming. And so we're splitting things up so we can see the argument. If you're the gal, you say, look, this is how much money I need. This is enough of this. You come across to the credit card, be quiet. And if you're a guy and you start to say, I'm the one with a job, I'm the plumber and carpenter and the architect that puts you in your own house as opposed to the architect who builds something in apartments and rents it for himself. If you're the guy that produces everything, you call up and say how many hours I have to work. I'll guarantee you it's more than 40. I'll guarantee you it's more than 80. And it doesn't make any difference right now if you're in Tucson or Tullsbury, England, or the Philippines or Australia, Brisbane. You're going to have to work a lot more hours than you care to admit. But if you put those two numbers together and you straighten yourself up emotionally, you go back to being a Yank wherever you are, then you can do something about it. So I hope someone will hear this and start calling in, and I hope to see you on the YouTube channel. And there's several dozen anecdotes, that's something that you might use. I hope you'll chime in. I hope you'll see you on the Facebook group and channel and Instagram and Truth Social. I hope to see you next week on TV. Okay, thank you for hearing.